So we've got the E4 error on the baby Brezza Formula Pro Advance, and you can reset it by holding the power button for quite a while, and it will distribute mixed formula and water, but it won't be heated. So we're trying to find out if it's the heating element limiter. So we've got it unplugged. Before we get started taking any of it apart, I'm just going to take out the powder canister and the water tank, and I'm going to empty. There's an internal reservoir that I'm going to empty when I'm not holding the camera, but if you depress this thing with a finger, then you can hold it over a sink and empty out the internal reservoir. It'll come out this port, and there's a little hole up here that it'll come out as well. So you kind of have to tip the whole machine. There are a couple different ways to get the internal reservoir to totally empty. All right, so we're gonna follow the instructions by Reddit poster Bender Michael R in this post. These black side panels slide up with retaining brackets, but before we do that, there's a few screws we got to take out. There's one here, Phillips, they're all Phillips, where the reservoir used to go, right at the top, and then more on the bottom. There's a couple screws. This one can stay in, but all the other ones around the exterior are going to come out, and we're going to just keep track of those screws. So I'll let you see when we're done with that. Okay, so we've got those 7 screws out, 6 on the bottom, 1 right up here. So now we can pop these sides up and out. There we go. You can see it's got these little hooks that meet up with these slots. That's how that goes on. This is also a good time to clean, you know, the little nooks and crannies that it's hard to get to normally. I might have to take this out with 2 hands. Okay, now that we've gotten both side panels off, we're going to take this back plate off. So there's 2 screws here and 2 screws up here, and with those off, we'll be able to start accessing the reservoir inside, which is this guy, and actually on the bottom here is where the heating element is. But we've got to take a bunch of this off in order to get this and get it unmounted from its screws. Okay, so once you get those screws out, the top just kind of lifts off of this back part, and you'll have to disconnect this tube and this tube down here. At the bottom of this back piece, it's held in these little holes, and it's got retaining clips on this back part. So you kind of have to bend. This is the bottom of the actual machine. So you got to bend that back so that the clip disengages from that receiving hole. And there's just the pair of them. So you got to do that over here as well. Once you have the back off, that exposes the internal reservoir, the circuit board, all that wiring. So the circuit board is screwed to the reservoir with these 2 screws, 1, 2. And the white wiring is coming from the heating element under there. So we're gonna have to disconnect that. This one is a wide connector, and this one is narrower. So that's how you can keep those straight. And they just pull straight out with a little wiggle. It's easier with 2 hands. So, but if you really want to, you can mark on the mark on this sheath with some permanent marker or something, just to keep the 2 labeled. But But once we get those 2 screws off, the tank itself is secured with 1, 2, 3 screws to the base. And then this top assembly actually will just lift out of place and off of these protrusions. Okay, so we've got our screws taken out. To take out the tank, you truly do need 2 hands, but I just wanted to show you the circuit board on the bottom had the screws, and on the top it's just kind of held in place between these 2 plastic nubs, and it has a little channel there on the side, so it just sits in that groove at the top. On the top of the reservoir or tank, we're going to lift this top assembly off of that little protrusion, but before we do that, we're going to take off this tiny tube that goes from the motor or the pump down to the reservoir. So this whole top assembly is going to lift off, but you do need 2 hands. So we have that out of where it came from, and it's not going to move ever too far from where we had it because it's still connected with this white cable and a black and red cable on the top. But now that it's out, we can rotate it so that we can see the bottom. And there are a few screws holding this bottom heater assembly in place. So we're going to take those out and push these clips out so that this heater assembly can be taken off the bottom of the reservoir. Alright, we've got our 4 screws and these 2 prongs out, and what that's going to allow us to do is take off this cover out from these white wires. And here you can see our problem area. So that's our heating element. I'm just going to take that out. And I've already kind of cut into this jacket, but there's a little retaining bracket here that holds this part onto the heater plate, and that allows or disallows the heating element to activate. So we're going to loosen that nut, and then that'll expose the part we're interested in.
So you can see the markings on the old fuse. It just reads SE fuse, 77 degrees C, 10 amp, 250 volt. And I'll show the box that the new fuse came in, and it's got the same specs on it. One important point that I forgot to mention in the in the video recording is that black spot on the fuse is going to be pointing toward the connector. So it's not pointing toward the heating element, it's pointing toward the connector when you actually make those crimp connections.
Before we put this back in, we've got our retaining bracket back in place with the new part in place. I'm just going to take an alcohol wipe and clean off this surface that's going to be contacting the water so that we don't introduce any germs or bacteria from the hands. Okay, now that we've got this bottom reinserted with the 2 little retaining prongs and the 4 screws, we're going to set that back into place. When you work on it, try not to tug too hard on those because they are pretty fragile. So we're going to use both hands to lift this assembly back up and give room for all these components. We're going to connect that tiny hose here, and all these this spot and this little thing are just going to sit under their respective parts. Fortunately, this top bracket is very flexible because it needs to be to do all that, aligning and adjusting. You got your 3 holes on the bottom, last one over there, and you just want to be sure also to get these cords out through. There's like a little opening over here. You'll see it when the tank is out, but they can easily get kind of caught under the tank that way and not be accessible. Okay, so we're just continuing to work in reverse order. We put the 2 white prongs back on here after we got the 2 screws on. You do have to pay attention to make sure this board gets back into its groove. And now we're just going to put the back plate on, making sure to reconnect the hose here and that vertical hose right there. After you get these two screws in, we're going to be putting these two in, and they kind of go into this little connecting bracket, but it's really easy for this assembly on top of the water tank to not be pushed down all the way. So just make sure it is. On this one you should be able to see a little bit of light through this hole. If you can't and the screw's not going in, just push down a little bit and make sure everything's lined up. So now it's going to be time to put the side panels back on, and if you kind of move them together, you can see how they fit together. The single screw at the top goes into this screw receiver, and these two pieces kind of fit together like that. At the bottom in the middle, they each have their own receiver. So I'm going to put, as you're looking at the front, this left panel on first, so that then after I can put the right panel and get our final screw into its location. Alright, so it's back in place, canister's back on, funnel and water tank. Yeah, it looks like it's still heating up our water, but we're not getting our E4 error. So once it's heated up and we know that the heating element and new fuse is working, then we will I'll record the bottle getting made, and then we'll wrap it up. Alright, it's been about 5 minutes. Looks like our water's up to temp. Still no air. And it works. It sounded a little funny there at first. It's probably to do with the internal reservoir not already having water in it. So great. Hopefully it continues to work, and we didn't have to buy another $200 piece of equipment. That's great.